Look, I really appreciate everybody being here. My name is State Senator Ethan Corson. So I have the privilege of representing our community in Northeast Johnson County. We've got some new faces here, which is always the goal, is try to get some new faces in here every month. And so I'll give you my district boundaries just to give you a sense of kind of where we sit within Johnson County. So I represent the area from basically the Johnson side of the Johnson-Wyandotte line on 47th Street, and we go out to about 95th Street, and then we go from State Line to about 6 blocks west of Metcalf. So kind of a rectangular area there in Northeast Johnson County. We are in the 7th Senate District. And so, as we mentioned last month, the legislature ended in the middle of April. And so what I really wanted to focus my update on today is the announcement of the interim committees that has been announced. It was announced on May 8th was when those committees were announced and assigned. And so what interim and special, so we have really 3 different kinds of committees that will be meeting between now and when the legislature resumes its session in January. So we've got joint committees made up of House and Senate members. We've got special committees. And we've got interim committees. And so what was approved by the Legislative Coordinating Committee, so that is the entity made up of legislative leadership in both the House and the Senate, they approve the formation of these committees. And so they approved a total of 82 days of committee meetings between now and January. So I wanted to highlight a couple of those that I think will be really interesting. So I am on the Joint Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice Oversight. And that's been a really interesting committee. We've been approved for 3 days of meetings. And so the primary focus, we get an update from our Secretary of Corrections and the Department of Corrections about what's going on in that department. And then we also hear from a lot of folks who are involved in the youth justice space about what we're doing and what maybe could be some best practices that we could adopt going forward. Another committee that I'm interested in and hopefully Representative Xu can touch on more is the Special Committee on Commerce. And the reason that I'm interested in that is where our discussion about our need for housing is going to take place. So I think one of the bigger issues facing our state is that we just simply don't have enough housing stock available across the state. One of the things that we did this legislative session is we pretty significantly scaled back our state program related to affordable housing tax credits. So we cut that program by about 88%. I didn't vote for that cut, but it did pass. And the reason given was just that it was a budgetary reason. Folks are worried about the amount of money that we were spending on that. Although, again, I think that that's a critical area that we need to look at going forward. So that'll be something that'll be studied in the Special Committee on Commerce. And then a really big committee that I want to alert folks to right now that's taking place is the Education Funding Task Force. And so this is really important because our state education funding formula expires on June 30th of 2027. So if you think back, just to give you a little bit of the history of that, Kansas had been in litigation for about a decade over our school funding. The Kansas Constitution, Article 6, says that school funding has to be 2 things to be constitutional. It has to be adequate, meaning that the overall amount of money that is being provided for our schools has to be adequate, has to be enough that our schools can function and that students can receive a high-quality education. And the second thing is it has to be equitable, meaning it has to be spread across our state and across our school districts in a way that preserves equity, where every school district is getting a fair and appropriate amount of those funds. So we were in litigation for about a decade over that whole school funding issue. It finally, in 2019, the Supreme Court resolved it and basically said, this is an amount of money and this is a distribution method that we would find to be adequate and equitable. So we've followed that formula from that point on. So we've been following that formula since 2019. The state Supreme Court actually did not trust the legislature to fully fund that formula. And so the state Supreme Court held on to jurisdiction of that lawsuit until 2024, basically saying, we are not going to dismiss this lawsuit because we are not convinced that you are necessarily going to comply with our order around school funding. Finally, in 2024, the case was dismissed. So fast forward to, again, 2027, there will be a new school funding formula that will have to be in place. And so that could be as simple as just a reauthorization of the existing formula, or it could be a wholesale rewriting of our school funding formula. And so this special education, or this education funding task force, has been put together with an eye towards developing what will be the new formula. So that, I think, of all of our committees, as far as interest from constituents and from our district, I think that's probably one that folks really are going to want to keep an eye on. Their goal is actually to have a draft formula for us to review during the 2026 legislative session that will start in January. So they've had an initial meeting. They will have future meetings over the summer and fall. So I will keep you updated on that. I will say that for me, these interim, joint, and special committees, I really have kind of a love-hate relationship with them. I really love them because the legislative session is oftentimes so cramped and there is so much going on that you're just simply not able to give issues the time that they really deserve, and you're not able to really have deep discussions about these really complex issues, because we've moved from basically what was a 90-day legislative session that we used to interpret it as that was kind of 90 business days. Now we've shortened that legislative session even further, and we basically said we're going to treat that 90 days as 90 calendar days. And so our session is even shorter and even more compressed. So again, it just makes it really hard for us to have these difficult discussions around housing or other issues that are facing the state. So I really like the idea of getting folks together outside of the legislative session and being able to really have deeper, more thorough discussions about one particular topic, because it's often really hard to do that in a 90-day session for a particular committee to say, we're going to devote just a whole week to one particular topic. And so these committees give us a chance to do that. So that's what I've really enjoyed about them, is the chance to go deeper on particular issues than you normally would during the session. The thing that I say I have a love-hate relationship, the thing that has been frustrating about those committees is we often meet, they're often some of the most bipartisan committees that we have, because there's something about just, I think, getting legislators together outside of the regular session, getting them away from leadership, and getting them in the summer. Folks are generally just in a good mood. And so we've actually worked together really collaboratively on several of these committees that I've sat on. The problem is that all they can really do is issue recommendations that the standing committees should take up during the regular legislative session. And we have a really strong chair process. So where our chairs generally have a lot of discretion about what they want to hear, what bills they want to hear, what topics they want to focus on. So my frustration has been that sometimes you'll spend several days really going deep on a particular topic, and you'll arrive at this really strong bipartisan consensus about, yes, when we get back in January, we want to recommend this legislation, or we want to have hearings on this topic, or we want to move forward in this direction. And we'll do that on a bipartisan, oftentimes almost unanimous basis. But then you get back to session in January, and all it takes is a chair just saying, you know what, I'm really not that interested in that. and then nothing ever happens. So it can be both really good and also a really frustrating experience. So that, I think, was a really important thing, those 82 days of interim committees that were approved in May. So now I want to turn it over to Kay Heley with Water One. And you remember that in March we had our sheriff, Byron Roberson, come in. And one of the things that I'm going to try to do throughout, particularly the summer and the fall, when we're not in session, is have different special guests from different areas of government. I've always tried to describe these town halls as kind of one-stop shopping for local government. So you get to hear an update from the Senate perspective, from the House perspective, from the State Board of Education perspective, from the County Commission perspective. And so I'm trying to add to that with having some other areas of government touched on. So we heard from our sheriff back in March. And, you know, as we know, we turn on our tap, we get this delicious, safe water from our tap provided for us by Water One, but there is so much that goes into the back end of that. So we have a truly great award-winning water utility, and Kay Heley is one of our elected board members, and so I asked her to come by and give us kind of an update about what's going on with our water utility. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And I want to thank the state legislature because in the last few years, they have started adding more money to the state water plan to help with water throughout the state. Because as you know, Western Kansas relies mostly on the Ogallala Aquifer, and that is endangered, I guess is a good way to put it. So, but at any rate, good morning. My name is Kay Heley. I just want to start with a couple Water One things. Our mission is to provide a safe, reliable, high-quality water supply with exceptional service and value. Important to know. I have to have my props. So I have two questions for you. Where do we get our drinking water? The Missouri River. Where else? The Kansas River. Excellent. So we rely on surface water, not groundwater like they do in Western Kansas. What is the most important responsibility of any water utility? Safety. What does that mean? Flesh that out a bit. I will tell you, the most important responsibility is fire protection. And most people don't realize that our water utilities across the country are the source for fire protection. So along with that, why do we have elevated tanks? Exactly, water pressure. Because I don't know if you remember that City Place fire. It was billions of gallons of water that were used to fight that fire out south off of Neiman and College. And without the tanks, there wouldn't have been the water pressure for the firefighters. So really important. So today I have just a few minutes. I could talk about our 490,000 customers in 17 cities. I could talk about our $2 billion in infrastructure, the 25 billion gallons of water that's produced each year, 19,000 fire hydrants that Water One maintains, 2,900 miles of pipe, and 400 committed employees. And I will tell you, Water One is hiring, so it's a great place to work if you know anyone. But I want to focus today on our journey for sustainability. And Water One looks at sustainability with three legs. The first one is fiscally responsible. Water One has a AAA bond rating. We have a 40-year master plan, which is quite unique amongst water utilities. We have a very vigorous asset management plan, which this year we are replacing 17 miles of mains because we're trying to stay ahead because we know that prevention is less expensive, than reacting to an emergency. And we also go to the second leg, which is social. And Water One looks at that in terms of affordability. We are amongst the lowest rates in the area. And you probably may know, 2 gallons of Water One water costs 1 penny. Back when we used to use pennies, right? But anyway, public engagement is a huge part of our social sustainability ideas. I've given some of you my cards. We do have a speakers bureau. So if you have an organization or group that would like to hear more about our water, please give me or Water One a call, and we can get that figured out. We also, several years ago, added inclusive language. One of our strategic goals is to be an employer of choice, and so our board added that inclusive language to try to make sure we are being the best employer that we can be. And then finally, environmental. Several years ago, we joined the Regional Climate Action Plan to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We do a lot to protect our source water. What's our source water again? Missouri and Kansas rivers, exactly. We have a renewables direct agreement with Evergy, which means that many of our pump stations here in Johnson County are fueled by wind energy, okay? We have a solar array, 91st in Lamar. If you're not looking for it, you will miss it. But it was the first ground-mounted commercial solar array in the county. And it provides 35% of the electricity for that pump station. It is a joint project with Evergy. Several years ago, we started treating our water at our Hansen treatment plant with ozone. Ozone is a very effective disinfectant. As a nurse, I'm a retired public health nurse. I love it because it removes pharmaceuticals and endocrine disruption compounds like atrazine, which is a big fertilizer farm product thing. We lease 1,500 solar panels from BPU because both of our treatment plants are in Wyandotte County. We have been doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the last 3 years, and this past year hired a consultant to come up with a sustainability plan for Water One. So we can see the 3 steps, the 3 legs, fiscally, socially, and environmentally. So I have some asks for you. First, please drink tap water. Please don't rely on bottled water. And I will give you a cup from my nurse perspective. Our drinking water at Water One is monitored and enforced, regulated by the EPA and the Kansas Department of Health and Health and Environment. Water One has to regulate or monitor 100 compounds, over 100 compounds. You know, that's a daily, weekly, monthly, annually, but 100 compounds. A bottle of water is regulated by the FDA, and they require 4. Okay, so you don't really know what you're drinking, I guess is my point, okay? Not to mention the environmental impact and the cost. Remember, 2 gallons for a penny. Bottled water can be 2,000 to 3,000 times more expensive. So encouraging you that way. Please do not put any medications or chemicals down any drain. Whether it's your sink, your toilet, please dispose of those properly. And the county has, you can take your medications to most pharmacies, the Prairie Village Police Department, to get those disposed of correctly. Please, if you have lawn chemicals, please use fewer. Use fewer, if any, okay? Because the rain washes that down into our creeks and streams and into our rivers. Please, if you irrigate, which I encourage the least as possible to save our water, but irrigate on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and the weekends, because I think one of our staff people said on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's like tens of thousands of more gallons of water because everybody's watering on the same day. And that also affects pressure, too. Some of you may know, on the water1.org website, you can sign up for a My account and look at your daily water usage. And you can set your limits, so it's a good way of monitoring how much water you're using. And then every water utility is required by law to produce an annual water quality report. You can look at it online, but you can compare, you can look at things, and you can know how your water is being regulated. Really important. And then finally, water1.org, a plethora of information, including animated videos of how our water is treated, that sort of thing. And then when it comes to the Speakers Bureau, please, if you need one of my cards, I'll be around afterwards. But I am the public health nurse that believes that our water is too precious to take for granted. And we're very lucky in our area to be able to take it for granted. But I'm urging you to please get engaged with our water. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Representative Rui Xu here in District 25. So that's 47th Street, like Ethan, down to 67th-ish or 71st if you're in Mission Hills, and then State Line Road to just right here in Lamar. This is your monthly reminder that the Supreme Court will be up for a constitutional amendment vote next August 2026. I think I'm just going to keep hammering that. I know it's a long ways away. I know it's not in people's minds, top of minds right now, but we need to kind of keep thinking about it and keep strategizing about it. So just reminding you of that. And then something I thought about when Ethan was kind of going through the school finance stuff is that we have probably an entire generation of now college students or 20-something-year-olds now who kind of went through a decade of Brownback defunding schools and then right into COVID. I think we've just done a really big disservice to our kids, and they've had quite a poor experience in Kansas over that particular generation. And so for all of us, I know that we stand for giving them a much better next 10, 12, 20, 30 years than the kind of the last generation got. So when we're in kind of this interim period after the legislature, not too many updates. I did want to touch on the housing thing that Ethan said. Kind of everything that kind of touches on commerce or economic development kind of got crammed into just this kind of broad interim committee on commerce. And so kind of in total, I think there are 4 or 5 different subjects in there. In total, there were 15 requested days. They only gave this big committee 4 days. And so I wanted 2 days just on housing, but we got 4 days kind of for everything. So we're gonna have to see how that kind of pencils out in the end. But this is the only time I'm ever going to say this phrase, but I've really been looking to Montana for inspiration on this. Montana, for a very Republican state, very conservative state, even with a Republican governor unlike ourselves right now, they have done a really, really phenomenal job with housing over the last 5 years or so. I kind of travel around the country sometimes and meet with other legislators from everywhere, and maybe 5 years ago, I was at a conference, sat at a table with a guy named Senator Ken Bogner, who's a state senator out of Montana, and just kind of got chatting with him, and then kept up with him over the years. And all of a sudden now, he's kind of like, again, the Republican kind of leader of Montana housing out there. If you're not aware, Montana has extraordinarily high housing prices. Over the pandemic, billionaires essentially just moved there and started buying up land, so that's not enough housing for everybody else. And so they really felt like they needed to do something about it. Some of the things that they have done they've done things like make ADUs available statewide, like cities do not have a say in it. That's just allowed statewide. ADUs are accessory dwelling units, kind of like, mother-in-law suites kind of in your backyard. You can think of it like that. And then anywhere that is zoned for commercial has to allow for multifamily as well. I think that makes sense. Like, you can think of downtown areas. If it's zoned for commercial, multifamily makes sense. Something that they've done relatively recently, I think within the last 3 weeks or so, is they've continued to push for this. And this is very, very nerdy and very wonky kind of housing world. But here in the United States, most cities have a requirement that apartment complexes of a certain size have to have access to 2 different stairwells. And so that's why all of our apartment complexes that built kind of look the same. They're kind of like that big square structure. They take up a lot of space. There's a big hallway, 2 stairwells at the side, right, and then kind of the rooms off of that. I missed last month because I was in Japan, and once you're kind of aware of this stairwell thing, you kind of see it everywhere. Everywhere in Japan, especially Tokyo, the big cities, they only have single stairwell requirements for apartments. And so they're very skinny. There's just essentially one stairwell that kind of goes up the front, and then that kind of opens up a lot of different design options for developers, much smaller space requirements for developers. And so you can kind of fit apartment complexes in different ways in different areas. And so that's something that a couple of cities have started looking at, and they're kind of the traditionally progressive cities you would think about. Seattle's looked at them, Austin's looked at them, Portland's looked at this. And now also the famously progressive state of Montana has started doing this as well. And so they passed that statewide. And so that's something that I've kind of been talking to my Republican colleagues about, is that there's a lot of, and I don't use this word a lot, but there's a lot of deregulation that we can start to look at. There have been studies that have shown, because theoretically, right, the 2 stairwell requirement is for safety, right? It's like if there's a fire and there's a fire down one stairwell, then there's another one to use. But there have been longitudinal long-term studies that have shown it actually does not increase or decrease safety at all going from 1 stairwell to 2 stairwell at all. So if it's not leading to safer outcomes, then let's look at that particular requirement. And so for most of the cities and states that have looked at this, it's only for apartment complexes 4 to 6 stories. It's not like 10 stories like that requirement exists. So stuff like that is stuff that we're going to continue to look at in this interim that I'm really going to push for. If you want to read more about this, just Google the Montana Miracle is what they're kind of talking about now. It's 2 or 3 sessions long that they've been doing housing stuff. So I'm really excited about it. It's pretty bipartisan. Hopefully it goes from more than just recommendations to actual policy that we're looking at. But I would love to take some more proactive steps on housing. That's it for me. Would be happy to hand it off to, looks like, Representative Stogsdill. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good morning. Good to see you all here this morning. I'm Jerry Stogsdill. I represent the 21st District in the Kansas House, and my district runs from 67th Street to 83rd and from State Line to just a little past Metcalf. And this will be my 10th year in the legislature. And I had a quick question to start off. I said, did anybody in here get a 747 this week? No one? Well, I received my first bribe this week. I got a letter from Qatar, and they said, we're out of flying palaces, but we do have a 2-seat used 1974 Cessna if you're interested. I turned them down flat. So it needed new tires anyway, but I wanted to say thanks to Kay. This will be my 6th year on the Water Committee in Topeka, and you cannot believe how lucky we are to have an organization like Water One looking over our water supplies and so on here in this area. It is the crown jewel of water departments in the state of Kansas. And we've done some really good work on the Water Committee over these last 5 years, and I'm expecting us to do it again. But we have no idea now. Some of the projects that we are supported by federal grants. And God knows what's going to happen with those. I mean, our dear leader doesn't seem to be real interested in environmental issues, in clean water, all of that sort of thing. So we are really going to have to be careful of what we have to deal with when we get back. We cannot go backwards in the state. We've done some real good things as far as taking care of limiting irrigation or giving incentives for people to do as environmentally safe irrigation as you can do. We're encouraging people to look more at dry water crops, that sort of thing. And I've gotten the committee to come up and go through the facility here at Water One. And I'll tell you, some of those folks that are from smaller towns and stuff, they were just astounded at the technology it takes to really keep your water clean and available and so on. So I'm hoping that I talked to the chair of the committee last week, and he's concerned, but we don't know exactly what we're going to be dealing with next year when we come back to the Water Committee, but it's going to be vital that we keep up the progress that we've been making. I serve on the Tax Committee with Stephanie, and I'm sure she's going to have an excellent report on that. And again, who knows what we're going to be looking at taxes this next year. We don't know what's going to happen at the national level. I mean, if they're doing some of the things that they're talking about, there's going to be more responsibility on the states. That means more money out of our pocket. That means we're either going to have to do without those services, or we're going to have to raise taxes, or we're going to have to do away with a lot of stuff. And these cuts to our pocketbooks here, to line the pocketbooks of billionaires and millionaires, is just absolutely obscene. And anyway, I just wanted to, the other committee I serve on in Topeka is the Education Committee. And this will be my 6 years ranking Democrat on the House Education Committee. I wanted to talk just a little bit about process today and how we come up with some of our bill ideas and so on. I read a report last week on a study that had been done on providing primary kids with books with bigger font types. Sounds very simple. Apparently, this report said the kids that were using the larger font types were doing tremendously better than the kids that were using these little small types. And I am absolutely 100% against kids in kindergarten through 4th grade learning off of iPad tablets. That is just absolutely ridiculous. And if the font size and type are really as critical as what this report is saying, think about a tablet. These kids who might be in kindergarten, 1st grade, might have 4 different font types and 4 different sizes on a tablet page. So that's something I'm going to be looking into. And then the next day, I got a call from a constituent, and her child had a learning disability and so on, and they put him on larger font books. And he went, in 6 months, he went from the 46th percentile in testing to the 77th percentile in testing. That's impressive. Really going to follow up on this. I've already contacted the Dean of Education at K-State, talked to her about it. She didn't know that much about it, was very intrigued. She asked me to come and speak to their dean's meeting the next time they have it. I think 4 times a year, all the deans of education from our state universities meet. And she asked me to come and talk to them about this because she said this is fascinating. And so their K-State at least is going to take a solid look at this. And I also talked to the chair of our House Education Committee, Susan Estes. And Susan is very good to work with, and she's very interested in this now. So wouldn't it be great if something as simple as changing font types and sizes at our primary levels would increase literacy rates in Kansas? Well, we're going to pursue it. We're going to see if that's possible. So anyway, that's kind of where we are. And again, we're just kind of waiting. You know, we've got, 6 months until we go back in January, and who knows what we're going to be seeing from the federal government at that point. I mean, we've got all kinds of grants and so on in the education facilities here in Kansas that those institutions depend on federal grants and so on. So we have no idea where that's going to go yet. But we'll have to keep an eye on it, and we need to continue to pressure our good senators and our congresspeople, except for Sharice Davids, who's on the good side, to do the right thing. They cannot keep putting up with the stuff that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. And also last week I mentioned at our second Saturday breakfast meeting that we have 123 local races. We need to get people involved with those. Like I said last week, I said the Republican Party is not trying to take over this country from the top down. That lunacy and idiocy at Washington is a diversion. They're trying to take it over from the bottom up. School boards, city councils, county commissions, those sorts of things. Those 123 races that we have in Johnson County this year are incredibly important. So I highly encourage you, if you can, take time, get involved in one or two or three of those races if you have time. But we've got to win those races this year. So anyway, thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, everyone. I'm Representative Stephanie Sawyer Clayton. I represent the area from Metcalf to State Line, 83rd to 103rd Street. Unless you get to Mission Road, if you're east of Mission Road, the area I represent is from Somerset to 95th. So basically South Prairie Village, Eastern Overland Park, and Old Leawood. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity to represent you all. I have just finished up my 13th legislative session representing you all in Topeka. So don't clap for me. It's an honor and a joy to be able to do this work. So thank you for giving me that chance. So the committees that I serve on, as the previous representatives mentioned, we will have some interim committees this summer. I'm your ranking minority member on the Commerce Committee. I also serve on Tax, and I serve on Federal and State Affairs. All three of those committees will be having summer study committees, and I have put in to be on all three of those. Now, the chances of that are fairly slim to none. In particular, I think the Commerce Committee, a lot of the things that they will be exploring will be going particularly deep, and being a representative from Johnson County, representing the reasonable business interests of this part of the state that represents most of the GDP of the state is particularly important. I think bringing that strong, calm, and reasonable voice that represents Johnson County to the rest of the state of Kansas is of particular import, because right now the people that we have at the top in the leadership in both the House and Senate, you know, they both represent parts of Wichita. And yes, we want Wichita's economy to do well. I certainly don't wish them ill, but you know, they're not us. We really are carrying the entire state. So having that representation is very important. I think looking to the future, especially in the way that we cover things like economic development incentives, we've had a fair amount of success here in Johnson County, in particular with the Panasonic project. But as we move forward, we need to make sure that we are not completely giving everything away. We want to provide a proper balance for the taxpayers. And that leads me to taxes. I am still hearing, and should be, given, frankly, the legislature's failure to deliver in this regard, from a lot of you regarding the lack of property tax relief. Now, I think we've discussed this here in this room several times, that this is very nuanced, right? We have, if you look at your property tax statements, we have a great deal of taxing entities that include our cities. I think we've got, you know, library districts, Johnson County Community College, all of these other taxing entities for services that we come to expect. We have high standards in this part of the state. And as we know, you know, if we want these services, they aren't free. Some of our taxes are going to end up fluctuating a little bit because of some of the cuts for some of the like unseen budgetary things that we see at the federal level. So we have a lot of services that get a lot of money from the federal government, and we also have services that get federal money just from grants and from some of those more invisible funding sources. I had someone ask me on the sidelines when I was getting more coffee to talk a little bit about what Medicaid is going to look like, and unfortunately, I cannot speak to the magnitude of those changes because we simply do not know what is going to happen. But I don't like the idea usually of comparing a state budget to, say, a business budget or to a household budget, but these are fairly analogous, right, to what we are doing here in our own homes. You know, the fact that if someone loses their job, you have to find money from somewhere else. If someone isn't getting, say, unemployment benefits or other benefits, you have to find a way to balance that budget. Now, I do not find it very likely that the legislature will be called in for any sort of special legislative session, barring any major financial disasters between now and when session resumes in January. The most that we could see, now at the executive level, the governor can make allotments. That's a word for gubernatorial cuts. It's been a while since I've had to use this word, but rescission. Some of you remember the rescission bills that the legislature had to put into effect back mostly in 2016 and I think in early 2017 before we put in place that major income tax reform. We're working with a lot of uncertainty, but one thing is certain is that as legislators, this is a service job, guys. This is not a job where we are, you know, trying to push for running for higher office. Now, unfortunately, again, the aforementioned Wichita leadership, both of them are running for statewide office. So, you know, Representative Xu and I were talking about Andor, so some of the Star Wars things, and I don't like to do these types of analogies a lot, but there is one portion in, I believe, it's one of the early trilogies where Yoda is lecturing Luke Skywalker, and he says, your mind is not on where you are and what you are doing. And largely, this tends to be one of the biggest problems in the legislature. Everyone is looking to see how they can get a quick little fix so that they can get a win, so that they can use that as a stepping stone to move up in political office. And you all are suffering financially because of that. I think that I don't usually like to speak for my colleagues here, but I am going to go ahead and do that, especially because you're lucky because the three of us House representatives and Senator Corson all serve you on the tax committee. And we are all committed to going back in January to bring you meaningful property tax reform. One of the ways that we do that is by working together with our locally elected officials to make sure that we are putting together reform that does not decimate or cap the services that have come to bring you all, and me too, frankly, the high quality of life that we expect. By working together on that, I do think that we will be able to thread that needle and kind of walk that tightrope. It is a difficult legislative possibility, but I know that my colleagues across the aisle are hearing the same thing. And so I think, or I sincerely hope, that property tax is going to be number one. Of course, they said that last time, and we ended up cutting taxes on income and on boats. Although I know a lot of you probably do own boats, and so you're not going to be paying taxes on that. I would have liked to see a tax cut, frankly, on your automobile taxes, because we all need those to get to work every day. So looking at those practical explorations for tax cuts, trying to figure out a way to, you can't just slice everything with a hatchet. When you make those tax cuts, you have to sort of do it like you're picking embroidery threads out. You pull out the wrong thread, the entire design collapses and it looks awful. So that is what we have in mind. Hopefully that is what we will be doing as we do our interim study committees. I do want to do one shout out to the water district. I picked up a rain gauge, and this is great because now I can actually have meaningful conversations with my older male relatives who always ask me how many inches of rain I got, and I have no idea. So one other thing that I do want, exactly, it's keeping families together, Kay, and I really appreciate that. One other thing that I do want to put on your radar, though, I am hearing out of Texas and other states that are talking about potential pharmaceutical use on behalf of, of individuals, of citizens, poisoning the groundwater. I've heard people talking about this when it comes to the use of, say, psychotropic drugs. So these are, things that are just, mood regulators, but also when it comes to things like birth control. Now, keep that in mind that, water pollution is a concern, but understand that that sort of social control vis-a-vis caring about the environment might be in our future. So I want to put that on your radar. Start thinking about that a little bit. And now I guess it's our Board of Education member, Melanie Haas, her turn. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Representative Clayton. Good morning, everyone. Great to see you. We got an upgrade in the room here. Got a lot more space. So this is your friendly PSA that this is the end of traffic patterns as you know them for the summer because school's almost out. So the seniors are done in most cases in Shawnee Mission, and then the kids will all be out at the end of next week. So summer is almost here. I represent District 2 on the State Board of Education. That would be all of Senate 7, all of Senate 8, and the lower portion of Wyandotte County, so Senator Pat Petty's area and Senator David Heley's area. The State Board meets every month in Topeka for 2 days, and so we just wrapped up our board meeting this week. And if you read any of the papers, I see a lot of head nods. It was a doozy. So I will try to get in all the things you want to hear about, but obviously happy to answer questions when I'm done. I'll kick off with some happy things. We did get to meet the Senate youth delegates, so that was fun. These are 2 young people that will go and represent us in Washington, D.C. as part of a Senate youth program, and there are also 2 alternates, so that's always a good time. And then we have a lovely secretary who organizes entertainment for us. And so we got to see a barbershop quartet from Lawrence High School, and they were absolutely fantastic. So if you ever want to drop in on a state board meeting, you should check the schedule and see, what entertainment do I want to be sure that I catch? But it's really nice to get to celebrate those young people, so it's always good to have them in the room. A big one that's been in the media and we've been tackling over several months at the state board is some changes in our assessments. The Kansas assessment is a hot topic. Some people are already saying, before we even head down the path, that the state board is getting ready to lower standards. And that's absolutely not true, but this group probably has heard me talk before about how Kansas sets some of the highest cut scores in the country for our state assessment. This is in the weeds, boring stuff, so I won't go too far with this, but a couple of things that we heard this month. The state board did go ahead and vote on a change to the way that we talk about assessments. So we have long shied away from using the word proficient because it's not in any of our statutes or our rules. But it turns out 48 other states do, in fact, use proficient all the time in the way that they describe their state assessments. And so the state board heard last month and then voted this month, and we changed our performance level descriptors. And so they used to be limited, starting at the bottom. The bottom is level 1, so these would be the lowest performing students. Be limited. Level 2 was basic. Level 3 used to be effective. Now it's going to be proficient. And level 4 used to be excellent, and now it's going to be advanced. Now, this will get tied to some changes to our cut scores that are coming in August. So I won't go any farther down that rabbit hole, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I will just say this is an area where I think the whole board is kind of learning as we go on this one. You'll hear me say a lot, I listen to the experts, and we've had a lot of experts come before us, and we will continue to have those people coming in over the next couple of months. And so I haven't made any kind of decision, and we don't even know what's going to come before us as a recommendation. So whatever you're reading in the media is false because we're not even there yet. The next thing would be we did review the substitute and emergency substitute and substitute licenses. And so that's going to be coming before the board. I know that there are a lot of retired teachers and teachers in this room, and I would love to hear from you, and really anyone on this topic, because this is another area where I want to make sure that we are holding ourselves to the highest standards that we can. You can teach in Kansas on a substitute license if you have, you can teach as a substitute if you've been a teacher before, maybe your license has expired, you can still come in as a sub. We have 4 different levels of licenses, and so the other levels of licenses include being able to substitute if you have a 4-year college degree, but there's then another version of the license that lets you teach as a sub if you have 60 hours of college. And then one that we used to call TEAL during COVID and has been renamed a couple of times, it's going to come back to us as it will continue as having a high school diploma, plus there are some educational courses that you have to take basically on classroom management and how to manage students in the classroom. And so that one may come back. And those folks at those lower tiers, they're not allowed to teach for as many days as other substitutes are, and they can't take a long-term substitute position. But this is another area where I would really like to hear from you. I've heard from a lot of superintendents already, and what they tell the state board is these people are people that are, especially the ones that are at the high school and the 60 credit hours levels, these people are folks that live in our communities. Sometimes they drive our school buses, or they've already been coming in as volunteers and helping out. Maybe their moms or dads who are the stay-at-home, and they want to be able to bring those people back into their schools because they've already been working with them as subs. They've had great experiences. They know them personally. So the rhetoric that, any high school student now can just come in and sub, we're trying to keep that one from happening. And I have heard of 0 instances of that. In fact, the high school students that are subbing are the ones that are headed into programs. They're headed into teacher prep programs. So when we talk about grow your own and recruiting young people to go into teaching, these are the people that we want to have coming in as substitutes. And then I had a big request to talk a little bit about not just the federal funding, but the discussion that happened at the state board this week. So last month, the state board voted to not accept, or not approve, $20,000 in federal funding that was coming to Kansas that we get every year. We've been doing this since 2011. We use this $20,000. We partner with the Public Broadcasters Association in Kansas, and they give us an extra $60,000 to put with that money. And what we do is we run ads on the radio to tell families about free and reduced lunches that are available, free and reduced lunch students. Specifically, the districts that have more of those, they provide free lunches for all families during the summer. So we have to put out a PSA to let these areas know, hey, you have access to this money. The state board, line item, pulled that one out of consent and voted it down last month. And to say I was speechless is an understatement. It came back to us this month in the form of, we kicked off the meeting with a long presentation on federal funding. And so the board, which consists of 3 new members and another member who consistently votes against federal funding, they needed to be reminded of what it means to have federal funding coming into our state. So when we accept federal funds for any of these programs, yes, there are strings attached. We are expected, you would want there to be strings attached to federal money. You want to make sure that whatever state you're sending it to is doing with it what they said they're going to do with it, right? So we just have to prove that. In this case, that money for advertising about those lunches, that's tied to our larger state food program for the students. So if we fail to meet the compliance requirement in this area of putting those ads out on the radio, and it doesn't have to be radio ads, it could be something else, right? But we have to let families know that these meals are available. That's part of what it means to receive that federal funding. So if we don't tell them, the Fed can actually come back and say, you know what, your whole program is now not in compliance. We're going to take all of your federal funding for school lunches, period. All of it. There certainly are states that choose to not accept certain pockets of federal funding for various reasons. And so this is a moment where the state board is going to really have to consider, how do we want to go forward from here? Are there areas where we want to stop accepting federal funding because we don't like the strings that are attached? This is a conversation that I'm serving my 5th year on the state board now, and we've been having this conversation since I started. But we now have more people that are choosing to vote this way. And so I think this is a conversation that we're going to see come up again and again. We had 2 lawyers stand in front of us this month and really go into a great amount of detail, and you can pull that up and watch it. It was first thing on Tuesday morning, if you want to find that part of the meeting. So I will do my best to answer any questions that you have on that topic. I believe I'll wait for other questions. Thank you so much, and I think we're going to bring everybody back up now.
All right, well, we'll get started with audience questions. This is always our favorite part. Let's wait for the microphone, and then we'll get started.
Okay. Hey, this is from Melanie. This $20,000 you just talked about seems so, inconsequential in the greater scheme of things. I wonder how it was identified as something for the, let's say, the anti-members of the board to vote on. For all of you, is there some kind of sense, maybe this is the conspiracist in me, that there is some kind of effort to identify at the state level that kind of spending, those kinds of federal benefits, so the legislature and the boards that get this kind of money, like the Board of Education, are asked to eliminate them? Is there some sort of overarching effort going on to identify those little things that we hear, there are efforts to eliminate?
Like I said, this has been a theme with at least one board member for the entire time that I've been on the board. And you've heard me talk about the consent agenda before and how we have people pulling things out of consent. So as of January, we have a new chair. I spent the previous 2 years serving as chair. In January, with our new board members, we elect a new chair. And so the new leadership on the board decided that they were just going to proactively pull everything out of consent that looked like it might be of concern to any board member. And so they put those items on the agenda and they give them just a few minutes. They're like 10 minutes, 5 for discussion, 5 for questions. And they have consistently pulled anything that has federal funding attached to it for as long as I've been there. I think the difference is that now they have a few more people that are willing to vote that way. And so we've had a couple of votes that have been really close. We've had 6-4 votes, and this one failed on a 5-5 vote. So I think at the state board, you will continue to see that anything that looks like it has strings attached, their words, in terms of federal funding, then they're going to want to pull those items out. I will also mention that during the education task force meeting that Senator Corson talked about, this very same thing came up where a senator in that meeting was talking about the strings that are attached and kind of poo-pooed the idea that we should even be concerned about feeding students whose tummies might be rumbling because, we have more important things to focus on. And so it's not just a state board topic.
So my question, hi guys. I know several of you are on at and also this will go to Senator Corson. As you look at potential tax bills for next year, are there roadblocks now in place for making changes? And I will say, I think that President Masterson, this is his plan all along since he's running for governor, or going to be running for governor. But don't you think there are roadblocks in place now for substantial property tax reduction with what we've already done when it comes to taxes and the revenues that are necessary for the state to function?
Hi, thank you. This is Senator Petty, by the way, out of Wyandotte, and a little bit of Johnson County. The answer is yes. So I wasn't here last month, but I'm sure they touched on the flat tax bill that got passed through the legislature. It's not just like a straight reduction to a flat tax. It's basically any time that our tax receipts exceeds this year's level, then anything that's above that automatically goes to pay down and lower the tax rate, the individual income tax rate. Once the individual income tax rate for all of our tax brackets hits 4.4%, then it goes to buy down the corporate income tax rate down to 4.4% as well. So it's like kind of like a ratchet down to a flat tax. And so basically, if we have excess revenues going forward, it will go down, it will go to pay for tax cuts, income tax cuts, and like there's no choice. We cannot use that excess revenue for anything else. And so basically that is, in my opinion, the primary barrier.
Although I will say this, I think that as more public backlash comes, especially in regards to the lack of property tax reduction, that there is always a possibility legislation can be changed. And so there's always a possibility for an adjustment to go into this plan. Now, granted, some of the corporate powers that be might not be terribly into this, but they might change their tune when they realize that the people are not with them. So that possibility does exist, albeit minimally.
I always think that where there's a will, there's a way, and I think that there's going to be, we do have a healthy ending balance right now. Are projected to have a relatively healthy ending balance until 2029, and so I think that you could have a situation where, you know, folks are trying to win a Republican primary, and part of the way that they're going to do that is by passing more tax cuts. So it wouldn't surprise me to see more tax cut legislation on the table, especially if somebody like President Masterson is getting attacked in a Republican primary for not having delivered property tax relief. It wouldn't surprise me if he just says, you know, the heck with it. I don't care what the budget looks like in future years. We're going to do some property tax relief because I need to win this Republican primary in August. And so it's something that I would not say is out of the question to see future additional relief.
My question is about residential water usage. I don't think you have to look too far to see our cool season grasses overwatered. In fact, I'm pretty sure some of it's overwatered to 5 times as much as it really needs. I would need to be convinced that education is working. Has there ever been consideration of economic incentives or disincentives like marginal pricing to try to cut back on residential water use?
A very good question. I am a proponent of adding another block to our water rates. Right now we just have 2, so you either and we have an increasing rate structure, so it is the more you use, the more you pay for. But I would like to see a 3rd level added so that people who are filling their pools and using a whole lot of irrigation and that sort of thing are having a. But it is a discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. And can I just add really quickly, because everybody else kind of said who their constituents were. I serve most of Johnson County, so we are elected to serve at large. So we have Spring Hill customers, Miami County, we have a few Wyandotte County, but most of Johnson County are my constituents. Thanks.
Sorry, I just got a little light bulb over my head. That I see no issue, honestly, with at least exploring potential tax breaks for those of us who don't really have a lawn so much as we have a yard. I don't water my grass because it is not in my budget to do so, and I imagine that there are a number of other folks. So, again, a positive. I prefer more carrot policies than stick policies when it comes to changing consumer behavior.
I just want to point out that Water One is an independent public utility. We cannot levy taxes. We are solely funded by our rates and the system development charges that developers pay. So we don't rely on federal money, but we also cannot tax. So that would have to be something more, another level, I guess.
Thank you for pointing me out. Is this on? Anyway, I have 4 questions. I'll keep them very short, and it's for all of you.
Let's do your top question, because we have a lot of people have questions.
For all you legislators. 1, what do you see on the governor's race, both sides, who the candidate's going to be? 2, Missouri is trying to represent as a ballot issue the abortion ban. Do you see something similar like that happening in Kansas?
So I guess I can start on the governor's race. I think it's already a very crowded field on the Republican side. I think it's just going to get more crowded. On the Democrat side, I think that's a little bit unclear. I think there'll be more clarity on that in the coming months. I think that what Representative Xu has said on the constitutional amendment to elect Supreme Court justices, I think that is really the way that they are getting at another bite at the apple on the issue of reproductive rights. The goal with that amendment is to pass that amendment and then to elect justices who will overturn the previous Supreme Court ruling that found that there is a right to abortion in the Kansas Constitution. So that's what I've been trying to impress upon people, is that this is a really, really important vote coming up in August of 2026. This is, again, a backdoor way of trying to have another bite at the apple, even though Kansans already made their voices overwhelmingly clear in August of 2022. So just encourage folks to try to get the word out about the importance of that election, because it's not maybe as readily clear just from looking at it, like, why is it important whether we elect or not elect our state Supreme Court justices? But I talked about school funding. It was our state Supreme Court that said that we had cut school funding too dramatically. A lot of folks on the far right are very upset about that. It was our state Supreme Court that found a constitutional right to abortion. A lot of folks on the far right are upset about that. And that August 2026 election is really to try to get another bite at the apple on those issues.
I want to raise something that isn't on your radars. It is the federal reconciliation budget bill. On page 6, there's a section that comes out of Commerce, which is very popular, state and local apparently, as well as federal, to put a lot of things in. And one of the things right now for us to look at is big tech lobby has put in language that would obviate any legislation for AI in any field, whether deep fakes in elections, which is something I've been interested in a long time and concerned about, or as we just passed in Senate Bill 186, I believe, to help get it at the deep fakes in intimate stuff, sexting and other things. And so they've said you can't touch this in any local, municipal, state level in the United States anywhere for 10 years. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I anticipate that AI will impact us over the next 10 years in ways we can't imagine. There is a letter circulating right now for state legislators across the country to be able to sign on to. It's bipartisan. It's being run out of DC, but I can circulate that, and I've reached out to Representative Haskins. But I wanted to put this out here for us to think about all the ways that we're being, we the people, those of us sitting in the room, all of us, elected and otherwise, are being asked to think about things in ways that impact us that we don't always see. And that's already come up in several of the conversations. So you can respond if you want to, but I really just wanted to raise it, not just for you, but for everybody in the room.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, so this is something that came on my radar this week as well. So in Kansas, actually, last year, we passed a bill that banned DeepSeek, which is a Chinese AI, on state computers in the sake of kind of security, right? Seemingly a pretty good thing. I think this bill would actually undo that. And then this was a Republican-led venture. So I texted my friend on the other side of the aisle about this, and he said he'd reach out. So my guess is if they do something in this, they'll probably have to change it, the language of some sort. It is pretty bipartisan to kind of regulate. Like, you can't just take away the state ability to regulate in any way, even for state security or whatever. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Thornton. Rui Xu, this is particularly for you. You were talking about what they're doing in Montana, if I understood correctly, that was influenced by the housing situation in Japan. You mentioned a study where, well, was that kind of in the same ballpark?
It was not influenced by the Montana legislation was influenced by just billionaires in COVID buying up Montana land, which has really driven housing prices up. I just went to Japan and I was kind of observing kind of stuff.
Okay, I guess I should, okay. What I'm actually getting at here is you mentioned that there are housing is being built in Japan with a single staircase. And that you mentioned a study that had, the results were that security, tenant safety is not impacted by having one less stairway down. I'd just like to know who did the study, if you know who did the study.
Not off the top of my head. I can look it up and let you know.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Hi, I'm interested in the housing affordability issue, and it's been talked about in a couple of ways. I see property tax release is related to housing affordability, and I see some of the things you're talking about, making it easier to build affordable housing. They seem like they're completely detached from each other, though. I'm curious if anybody has proposals or ideas for more integrated approaches to dealing with this combined problem of housing affordability, since property tax rates are related to house values, and climbing values have been impacting that. So curious about comments from anybody on that.
Yeah, good question. For me, it's basically talk about it in the way that lets me get a bill passed. And so, I mean, another thing that we could talk about with housing, it's related to homelessness as well, right? The more housing supply that there is, the less homelessness. There's a pretty straight line there. Talking about it that way does not help you in the Kansas legislature. As soon as you start mentioning the word homelessness up there, they're going to find a way to criminalize it even more. So I just stay away from that one. So basically, you know, in the Kansas legislature, I specifically talk about it like deregulation and then ways that it will help rural Kansas, even though it also does help, you know, suburban Kansas and with the homelessness issue. I think as we move along with the interim process and maybe a housing package next year, hopefully it'll be kind of more, it won't just be like one bill here, one bill there. It'll be like a package and we can kind of construe it. Probably like in an election year, next year, it'll probably be around property taxes. That'll kind of be the primary seller to people. But yeah, as we move along, we'll kind of cohesify it a little bit.
You know, as the chief sponsor, but we have co-sponsors sitting up here as well, of the return of the homestead exemption for renters. Remember, this was in place, it got put into place in 1979 and removed as a pay-for the Brownback tax plan in 2013. Bringing that back, you know, it's the same benefit that, you know, we didn't, for a while, the homestead exemption for homeowners was taken out too for, I think, about 4 to 5 years. So putting that back in as well, I think is part of a package, a property tax, housing relief package, and frankly, allowing the majority party to take ownership and credit of it. I don't care if I get credit for something, I want it done. And so I think that Representative Xu and I share that same vision, and working on our colleagues across the aisle to, put this forth and become champions for it in a way that's palatable to everyone across the state is the way that we get those policies enacted in this climate.
I think we really do. I think we're all in agreement on this. We really fundamentally need more housing. I think that is the biggest thing that we can do to try to help make housing more affordable. It is at its most simplest form, it is a supply and demand issue. We do not have a large enough supply of housing, and that's why the little bit of housing that is on the market is so expensive. So I think we need to look at all the ways that we can incentivize more home construction. The second thing is that's related to property taxes, because the biggest variable in your property taxes is the assessed value of your home. And one of the reasons that assessments are going up so rapidly is that there are so few homes. There's such a demand for those homes, and that's driving the assessments up. When you also look at the ability of cities, counties, municipalities to pay for expenses, the more density that's in an area, the more homes, the more taxpayers they have in an area, that allows them to lower taxes on everybody within that area and still meet their budget. So I think fundamentally the number one thing we can do is something Representative Xu has alluded to, is just driving more supply. Yeah, I'm going to stick on the we need more housing supply.
I had one question related to water, particularly since we have such a highly scientific head of the Department of Health and Human Services now. Where is Water One on fluoridation and basically on the use of science going forward?
I would say categorically our staff is very committed to science. On the issue of fluoride, I just want to be clear that a state statute allows communities to use to add fluoride to their drinking water, but it requires a community vote, and our vote happened in the 1960s, and the statute does not have any way to rescind that vote. So barring any state statute revision, it is not a Water One decision or a board decision about fluoridating or not fluoridating. I personally support the American Dental Association's recommendations, for fluoride use. And Water One currently is at 0.7 parts per million, with fluoride, which is the totally recommended place.
In the state legislature, has there been any talk about fluoridation?
Yeah, I just want to mention, we took up the issue of fluoridation on the Water Committee late in the session this year, and I'm sure it's going to be right back on top of the agenda next year, because we had some, how shall we say, interestingly, lunatical people came in and testified against fluoride in the water. That were, it was RFK Jr. level stuff. And but we also had scientists from K-State and other organizations that really know what they're doing and come at it from a scientific basis, that came in and said, look, fluoride has been critical in reducing tooth decay and stuff, especially among children and so on. So I will certainly be in favor of continuing with fluoride in use in our water. But it will be, I think, a major topic of discussion in the Water Committee this coming year.
And if I can just add, because Water One does not rely on federal funding, as long as our board makeup remains science-based, then I think, our staff know how to manage the regulation, how to manage the safe water. I think we could continue doing that without any interference from other entities.
All right, this could be our last question, and then we'll stick around for any other questions, but this will be our last question. Want to let people go?
This question is for Jerry, please. About the iPads, with the children using the iPads and the font and bigger font being better for them, and you are looking into that. I hate to say I can't attribute the article I read. I try to read responsible literature. But there was concern about the way actually children's vision is changing. And I don't know if that's implied in what you're talking about studying or not. And if it isn't, I think that should be looked at too.
Well, I think it's just come up as an issue at this point, and we don't really have a lot of specifics around that, but at least the initial investigation on using larger fonts, especially in the primary grades, would be a good idea. And I think it is certainly something that we need to investigate. And as I say, the deans of education at our major universities here in Kansas seem to have an interest in that now too. So hopefully over the next year we may get some of those institutions to do some studies on how that works. But I'll tell you, as having taught in Shawnee Mission way before dirt, but we had books, workbooks, and worksheets, and it was not in 10-point type. And those kids, in my opinion, it was a great way to learn. And we used phonics, and we used emphasis on syllables and so on like that. And I want to see us get back to that basic type of learning experience for these kids.
I want to add on to that. When I joined the state board in 2021, one of the first things that I asked for was guidance from the State Department of Education on at what ages should children be learning on a device with a screen versus not. And a huge part of that concern was, how are our younger children learning how to read and write? Because if you're learning how to write on an iPad screen with an Apple Pencil, that is really not what we're looking for. And there is a lot of research that backs up everything that Representative Stogsdill is talking about, as well as younger students shouldn't be learning on screens, and those of us that are older, we don't retain as much on screens. When you tie to that, the connection that happens in a child's brain when they're using their hands, whether they're learning how to write or whether they're just touching the paper pages of a book, it makes a huge difference in the way that they are experiencing that learning opportunity, and that drives right into literacy. So as we are at a place in Kansas where we've had a task force on literacy, and we're talking about ways to train our teachers up so that they can stop some of the bad practices that they learned in the past couple of decades and come back to something that is not just phonics-based, but science-based. Part of that science, I think it's imperative that we're talking about younger students, especially when they're learning how to read, have to be learning on paper and not using those iPads. And it is my personal opinion that a student shouldn't have access to those devices in elementary school, period.
All right. I'm getting some pressure from Representative Clayton to let my dad ask a final question.
I didn't know that was your dad.
So this could go one of two ways. If it's bad, I'm blaming Representative Sawyer Clayton.
Well, my question is for Water One. I keep getting these letters in the mail telling me my water line is likely to explode at any second, any minute, and it'll cost thousands of dollars to repair, so I should sign up for this, I guess I'd call it insurance. Is that related to Water One, and is it a scam?
It's a very good question. Water One does have an agreement with HomeServe to use the Water One logo, because some years ago we were getting 20 of those warranty requests or applications, and so Water One evaluated each of the companies in terms of their customer service, that sort of thing, and chose HomeServe to be part of it. And I will also say that a part of each of those contracts that people sign goes to a fund that is used to help the community. And I look at them as a warranty program, and my suggestion to people is, if you live in an older home where your service line has never been replaced, it might be an option to consider, just like if you were buying an appliance or something. But if you have a relatively new house where your service line is relatively new, that may be another consideration. So it is a warranty program. Kind of think of it that way. Does that help?
Well, I think of it more as like prepaying for repairs that may never happen, which most consumer advocates recommend against.
Then you take your advice how you wish, okay? I mean, I'm just saying it's a warranty program that's available. Water One has vetted all these companies, so at least you aren't getting 50 million that are saying they're with Water One, okay? All right, thanks.
Yeah. Now, and I will speak to this briefly. A lot of us here in Northeast Johnson County have older homes. My home was built in '62. And now while this is more of a wastewater thing than a Water One, this is water out as opposed to water in, I just dropped $7,000 on replacement of my sewer line because of tree roots. My house was built in '62. Things get old. All I want to say to you all is unless you have $7,000 laying around, which I used to and no longer do, make good choices and make reasonable plans for the future. And we'll try to do that at the legislative level as well.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Please make sure you sign in so we can let you know, but we'll be back on our 4th Saturday schedule in June. Thanks so much for being here.